When you have doctors that keep the business stats so close to their chest that the staff members have no idea about overhead and all these things it takes to run this business, I think you have staff members who pretty much glaze over when it comes to numbers. 75% of all restorative needs are discovered in hygiene visits. So there's another really important reason to keep hygiene department busy, since we know that most of the restorative needs are going to be discovered through a hygiene visit. Doctors should not minimize the importance of hygiene procedures and keep those fees low when they're raising up everything else. It's just not fair and it's not right.
Get ready for your unofficial dental hygiene podcast. These are the tales of two hygienists, one East Coast RDH and one West Coast hygienist. Listen as they tackle the profession of dental hygiene with humor and enthusiasm. Now, please join Michelle Strange and Andrew Johnston as they tell you a tale of two hygienists. Hello there. Welcome to a Tale of Two Hygienists podcast, episode 203. This is Michelle, not Andrew on this podcast. Sorry, guys. I know you love hearing his voice, but we are both busy and traveling and we were not able to make this intro work this week, but we are very excited to actually see each other at the end of this week. We were just saying how we haven't really been talking to each other. We've been so busy. We used to talk almost every day, and now it's maybe once a week. And some of you listeners have asked us in the past, actually, do we actually get along and are we friends? And I mean, we're not always friendly with each other, mostly because I'm being a maniac and I'm mad at something, but we are friends for sure. So I'm sorry not to have him on this intro, but this last episode is going to be wrapping up this month of business and benchmarks of dental hygiene. This is a very uncomfortable place for me to be in talking about business. I don't love that. If you listen to last week's podcast with Corey, it makes sense. It's just not in my DNA to love the business side of dentistry. But I've always been a person that can get behind a why. If I can understand your why, I might not like it, but I'll do it and I'll do the best at it that I can. And the one with Josie and today's podcast with Dianne Glasscoe Watterson gave me really amazing whys. And so I definitely am looking at the metrics and benchmarks differently. I'm not looking at it as just a profit center, but there's so many other things that go into the metrics and business side of dentistry that I've never considered before. It's been no surprise to anybody who's listened to this podcast for a really long time that I've truly just hated the numbers. I just, none of that resonates with me. The science resonates with, well, I shouldn't say none of the numbers. Data from science resonates with me, but not so much production and goals and all the things that Josie was talking about, but I get why we have to know it. So I hope you guys are really taking in, you're sitting with the information, you're kind of thinking about why did you maybe have a reaction to it? Maybe that reaction was super positive. Yes, they are speaking my language. Or some of you have actually sent in your messages and said, it makes me very uncomfortable. And I think it's just a really good time to sit with that and get with why that makes you uncomfortable and how can you work past it. This is the holiday season is always busy, but I always think that the holidays are a really great time for reflection, which I'm also not very good at, but this seems to be the time as the end of the year or the year's winding down. I just like to think about what the year has looked like and what I can do, how I've grown and how I can start looking at 2020. God, that's so weird. We're saying 2020. But we hope you're all enjoying this. We hope you enjoyed last week's webinar. If you attended the 24-hour webinar from EMS, it was fantastic. Some of our favorite guests, Trisha O'Hare, Debbie Z, and Karen Davis, all smart women who probably have a doctorate, enough education to have a doctorate. So enjoy this episode with Dianne Glasscoe Watterson. I finally met her 2 weeks ago. Y'all, I've been trying to get her on the podcast for years. And that is not a joke, years. And it's just, I don't know, maybe the series didn't work out. The time frame to get her on wasn't working out. We weren't going to be in the same place at the same time. It was just so many things. She finally has been on the podcast. It was such an honor because I have been reading Dianne's stuff in RDH magazine for my career. So to have people who have been mentoring me and probably didn't even realize they were mentoring me, it's such an honor. And she's smart and kind. And all of our guests, you should know this, are incredibly approachable. So if you have questions, check them out, email them, talk to them, but keep learning from them. Thank you again, Dianne, and you guys enjoy this episode.
Hey, Michelle.
Yeah.
It's time for the interview.
Oh, but I had something else to say.
We need to let the experts talk now.
Fine. So listeners, this is a long overdue interview. We have Dianne Glasscoe Watterson. Did I say that correctly?
That's correct.
Okay. You may not know this, but I love to butcher last names. So I'm glad I said that correctly. And I have followed you since I was a baby novice, little fetus of a hygienist, like very early on, because you've been writing lots of articles for many years. So tell us about yourself, who you are, what you're doing, and we can then get into our topic.
Well, I have been in dentistry since 1972, and I did not start as a hygienist. I started at front desk. And so for 4 years, I managed a dental office, and that was in the days before dental insurance even. So one person at the front desk had a lot of responsibility and did everything up there, including the payroll and the doctor's quarterly taxes and everything. I mean, just everything that happened. So about 2 years into that job, one day, our lone chairside assistant went to lunch and never came back. And so that day, I was baptized by fire into chairside assisting. And I'll never forget, the doctor had 2 crown preps on his schedule, and the hygienist had a full schedule. And he said, well, Dianne, I reckon you'll have to help me. I had never even held a suction in my hand before. So talk about green. I was totally green, but I love chairside assisting. I mean, he was such a good teacher, and I found I loved it. And so that's really what got me started about maybe going to hygiene school. That and the fact that, I'll just be brutally honest with you, I did the payroll. And I knew the hygienist made more than double what I made and worked less hours than I worked. And I thought, if I want some of that, I really don't want to sit around here and do front desk the rest of my life when I could be making a lot more money doing hygiene. Little did I know at the time how hard hygiene was. I mean, you don't know what you don't know.
Right.
But hygiene has been a beautiful journey for me. I've graduated hygiene school 78. I did hygiene continuously for about 12 years. And then children came along. I stayed home with my children, just worked part-time for a few years. And then I worked in an office where they had a practice management consultant come in and help us. And she helped our office so much. I was so impressed by her. I thought, man, I would really like to do that kind of work, but I did not have any formal business education. I felt I needed it. So I went back to school and I got a bachelor's degree in a business area called human service management. And so I had to do an internship at the end of that. And I did a big part of my internship with Linda Miles, who many of you know. And Linda and I have been great friends down through the years, but I began this journey. I said, how do I get consults? How do I start this? And so Linda said, well, you need to be published. And so I said, well, what do I write about? She said, you write about what you're passionate about, what you know. I wrote some articles. I wrote, I think, 3 articles and submitted them to Penwell. Back then it was Penwell. And the 4th article that I sent, Joe Blaze liked it. And so he published, that was my first one. That was in 97. And that began, once you get the eye of the editor and you show them that you can write, then that began a long career in writing. So then I submitted something to RDH, got it published right off, and then, so RDH and Dental Economics are sister publications. So anyway, started my column in 98 with RDH and have published every month for all these years. I think it's about 23 years.
Since then?
Yes.
Every month?
Yes, every month.
That is so impressive. And you come up with your content because people are writing in asking you questions?
Well, yes. And the fact that I really have a 3-pronged business. I have my writing, I have my speaking, and I have my consulting. So some of the things I write about are things that I have encountered in dental practices too. And I even pulled on some of my own experiences in dental practices as well. When my children were young, Michelle, I did a lot of temp work. I didn't want to work full-time anywhere, so I was in probably 40 or 50 offices in a 3 or 4 year span of time. I had all these different experiences and they're all different. Every office is different. So I had a lot of good fodder to write about from that too. But mostly now, my writing is from hygienists. After all these years, I just, every week, I get 7, 8, 9, 10 inquiries from hygienists and doctors across the country. And for those that I do choose their dilemma to write about, I send them a complimentary copy of my book. So that's
what
pretty
is
much
the name of your book?
Well, I've written 3 books, but the newest one is called Real World Dental Hygiene, Where the Rubber Cup Meets the Road.
Oh my God, that's amazing.
That's it.
Oh, that's amazing. What is, like, if you had to give a synopsis of that book, what are we learning with it?
I tell you what I've taken. I've taken what I consider the best of my articles, and I pulled from those articles and I made chapters. Like, I can give you an example. I have a chapter on knowing the numbers, which we're going to talk about today.
Yes, ma'am.
I have a chapter on the numbers. I have a chapter on problems with coworkers. I have a chapter on coding. I have a chapter on problems with the boss and different kinds of scenarios, with doctors. I have a chapter on treatment discussions with patients, which is mighty important, I think, for dental hygienists to know how to talk treatment with patients. Scheduling, there's a chapter on legal issues and the dental hygienist. So, and radiation safety issues. And the last one is communicating and landing a job and preventing burnout. So it's all real world stuff for dental hygienists. And a couple of dental hygiene schools, interestingly, have picked up my book and started using it in their professionalism classes for their students, which thrills me.
Yes, absolutely. Like you said, we are going to get into the numbers of it because this month we are really kind of delving into the business side of dentistry and dental hygiene and those numbers. And Dianne, for you, if you've not listened to every episode that ever existed in this podcast, which is well over 200 at this point, through the last 4 years, we have discovered that I am very uncomfortable with the numbers. I don't enjoy the business side of it. I've never been comfortable delivering treatment plans. But when I started with this podcast, I was so anti-business of dentistry. And now I'm learning to understand it and at least play nice with the idea of the business of dentistry. Do you find that that's a more common thing, or do you see a little more proclivity towards the business side of it in from hygienist?
Oh, that's a great question, Michelle. And I'll tell you, I think it has everything to do with how the doctor treats the business. And if the doctor shares business stats in organized meetings with staff members, when you have doctors that keep the business stats so close to their chest that the staff members have no idea about overhead and all these things it takes to run this business, I think you have staff members who pretty much glaze over when it comes to numbers. But, the numbers are mighty important. I have an MBA, and I tell you, I love the numbers. After I went back to school and got that business degree, then later I went back again and got my MBA. As a consultant, my clients send me a practice monitor every month, and it's got 16 key indicators on there that I monitor. They're numbers. And I love the numbers. It's almost like I can't hardly wait to get my monitors from my clients because I love looking at the numbers. But the numbers tell a story, and the numbers actually are very objective. This is the data, and it has nothing to do with personalities and all the politics of the office. This is all about the raw data, and if this practice is financially healthy or not. Often it is determined, you can tell it by the numbers. So, and if a practice is financially healthy, then the doctor can better afford to take care of the people who work there. And I've seen it over and over again as a consultant. I've dealt with a lot of practices over the years, Michelle, that were very financially unhealthy. And I'll tell you, you'd be surprised if you ever got to see some of that. Is sad. I've worked with practices before where the doctor was not getting a paycheck. Oh. They were in such bad shape. By the time the doctor paid the bills and paid the staff members, there was nothing left. I had one practice one time, they were living off of the doctor's wife's salary because the doctor wasn't bringing home any money. So I know it's hard to believe. It's really hard to believe, but it's a reality today.
No, and I love sometimes doing these podcast interviews back to back to back about the same topic, because in my first one with Josie that you guys are going to be hearing, 2 weeks prior to this, we talked about how a dentist that might be going through that and in that moment can't be creative. They can't they can't hear any new ideas. They can't hear about the new technology because they're surviving. And sometimes we forget as hygienists that they have a lot of responsibility outside of being a clinician. I don't know if any of them actually signed up to do that, like they went to dental school wanting to be clinicians. Yeah. And oh, by the way, here's some HR stuff and all the other managing of people that you have to do now.
Well, the average general practice will have an overhead, which is all the money it takes just to keep the doors open and pay the staff members and everything, the dental supplies, all those things. They'll have an overhead of 65% or more. So if you think about if it's 65%, we're often happy if it's 65%. I've seen overheads in the range of 80% before in some offices. That leaves very little left. That does not count the doctor's pay. So, when you think about these things, dental practices typically have high overhead. If you compare dental with medical, and you see the expenses in a medical office as the business compared with a dental has much higher overhead. So we have to manage these overhead expenses to make it profitable.
So what is the difference between medical and dental as far as the expenses? Is it that we have a lot more consumables that we have or equipment, or is it the pay, our salaries?
Well, in medical, now I've never consulted in a medical practice, so let me just say, but they do not have, one of our biggest overhead items is dental supplies. And we consume a lot of dental supplies. And so that's a big one. Staff salaries are another one of the big three in a dental practice are salaries and dental supplies and lab fees. And, doctors that do a lot of crown and bridge, oh my gosh, sometimes the lab fees can eat up as much as 10 to 12% of the overhead. So that's something that doctors don't have. They might have some laboratory expenses, but that's passed on to the patient. You know it, and I know it as a medical patient. You get bills for your lab fees.
Oh, yes.
Dental practice, yeah. So, the dental practices do have high overhead.
The overhead, though, that is going to factor into what we make as hygienists. Is that correct?
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. And so you want me to just go ahead and talk about some of those metrics?
Yeah, let's get into
since we're
that.
there. Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Well, there are some benchmarks in dental hygiene that are kind of industry standard benchmarks. I don't know who came up with these, but some of the standard benchmarks is that the hygiene department will produce somewhere between 25 and 35% of the total office production. So that's one of the benchmarks. I'm going to go through the benchmarks, and then we'll go back and talk about some of the things that can skew those benchmarks. We like to see about 75% of all restorative needs are discovered in hygiene visits. So there's another really important reason to keep hygiene department busy, since we know that most of the restorative needs are going to be discovered through a hygiene visit.
Is that restorative needs, like that is active disease, or is that,
yes.
Are you going to say cosmetic is maybe a different thing, or the wants?
No, it can be all of it. It can be all of it. And some hygienists are very, very good at promoting what the doctor does. And so if you work with a doctor who likes to do the elective types of things and cosmetic things, some doctors just have a penchant for that type of dentistry. They spend a lot of money learning how to be good at doing good cosmetic dentistry. And so when a hygienist is good, understands what the doctor does and knows how to talk with patients about that and promote it without hard selling, then my gosh, that hygienist has just increased her value to that practice multiple times by being able to talk about dentistry to the patient in a comfortable manner, a manner that doesn't seem like selling. So, yeah.
So we're talking like veneers as well, or cosmetic cases, crown and bridge though, but sealants, all of
it.
Okay.
All of it.
All right. 75%.
Yes. Let's see. Another one is that 1/3 of the hygiene codes will be perio codes of some flavor. We have about 4 or 5 different perio codes that are the most productive things that hygienists do are perio procedures. So, one of the benchmarks is about 1/3 of the codes will be perio codes. But I'm going to talk about that in a minute because there's a lot of practices that don't meet that one. Downtime should be no more than 5 to 8% of the total available time. And another benchmark is that hygienists should produce about 3 times their wages. So the hygienist's wages should be somewhere around 33% of what she produces, or he. We know also that hygienists are optimally positioned to promote restorative and elective dental procedures. So these are just some benchmarks that often consultants will refer to when they are crunching numbers and just looking at raw data. But I've been doing this a long time, and I'll tell you, I've seen hundreds of practice monitors and breakdowns of the data for many, many different offices. And I can tell you some of the things that I've seen where these benchmarks will be skewed. For one thing, when you say that you want the hygiene department to be producing 25 to 35% of the total office production, well, that's assuming one doctor and one hygienist. Well, a lot of offices have 2 hygienists or maybe even 3 full-timers for one doctor. So when you have that differences in the employment ratio to doctor, employee ratio to doctor, you'll see some differences there. I was in an office once where I consulted, and hygiene department was doing 42% of the total production. Well, that alarms me if I see that, because I think they have a weak restorative department if hygiene is doing that much, of the total. Anyway, that's one thing that can skew it. Another thing that can skew it is if the doctor is niched into that about 5% of the market that do a predominance of cosmetic type of dentistry. Well, if doctor is doing a predominance of really high dollar dentistry, then the hygiene department's not going to carry 35% of the production. So I've been in practices, the cosmetic practices, where hygiene's only doing maybe 22% of the total. And it's not because of a lot of downtime. It's not that at all. It's just that what the doctor does is such high dollar dentistry that it skews that percentage. So that can skew it as well. And the third thing I'll mention that really bothers me is when I see the hygiene department low as a part of the total production. Sometimes doctors will raise their fees, but they'll leave their hygiene fees low. In other words, they think patients are so stupid that they won't notice if they raise their crown fees by $100, but they're going to leave those hygiene fees right where they are because they think the patients notice the hygiene fees more than they notice the other. And that's not fair. And so I tell doctors, I say, look, your fees, what you're charging for your hygiene procedures is inordinately low. You didn't raise them like you raised everything else. So that will skew that percentage. So that's something you have to look for, if they're keeping their hygiene fees inordinately low. And I've seen that several times.
And that includes like not raising prices for radiographs or fluoride treatments,
Right.
the whole shebang. Okay.
Everything a hygienist does, and doctors should not minimize the importance of hygiene procedures and keep those fees low when they're raising up everything else. It's just not fair and it's not right.
We're talking restorative. I have never personally worked restorative. I've always worked perio. So is that 75% also going to be more the surgical side of things? Or is my perio number going to be 3/4 of it because I'm doing more 4910s? Like, how does that look for those type of practices?
Well, that's a great question because in a perio office, if we're looking at just raw numbers, most of the procedures a specialist does are higher production procedures than a GP dentist.
Right.
So again, if I was looking at the hygiene department as a percentage of the total, I would expect it to be lower than the benchmark. You might be at 22 to 25%, or maybe even 20%. I wouldn't get excited about that. If I analyzed the downtime and I saw that your downtime percentage was not inordinate, then I would say, well, it's just because the doctor does a predominance of high dollar dentistry.
So if I can just make sure I understand that, because if I'm a hygienist in a perio practice, do I still, and my doctor is doing lasers and implants and perio surgeries, and that dollar amount is higher, is my 33%, that's because that's going to go into a different siloed number, right? Like I still need to be producing 33%, even though maybe 22% out of the whole number. Is that correct?
That's correct. And also, though, my experience is that in specialty offices and hygienists who work for periodontists, it is typical and common for them to make more money than hygienists that work in GP offices. Because again, your total production is higher as a rule. Unless you're a startup or something, your total production is going to be higher. So again, the more money that comes in, the better the doctor can take care of the people who work there.
Okay. Well, thanks for clarifying that, because I was just curious because I've never talked restorative. I've always talked perio.
Well, you promote though what your doctor does though, right? I mean,
Right,
you are able to talk about implants, and you are able
Tissue
to talk
grafting
about
and
things.
bone grafting,
Sure.
extractions.
There you go.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. So then, and tell me if I'm digressing too much, if you were going to hit another topic, but the third of it needing to be perio codes.
Yeah, that's my next one. That's the next thing I have up. Now, again, this is an industry benchmark somebody came up with, but when I do an evaluation in the beginning where I haven't even met anybody yet that works there, but I have them send me a breakdown of procedure by code for 3 months, 3 consecutive months. Like, I want to know how many 1110s that were done. I want to know how many 4910s were done by every provider there. I want to know how many of every procedure they do that were done. And so if I see that there's only in 3 months' time, I might have a hygienist that's doing 600 prophies, but maybe only 3 4342s, which is site-specific root plane and scaling. I'm thinking that's not good. Is it reasonable to think that she saw 600 patients in a 3-month period and only 2 of them had pockets? I mean,
right.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah,
so
because the prevalence is definitely higher in our country.
Yes. So when I see that kind of thing, I think immediately I'm thinking she doesn't have her perio radar engaged. She's not looking for it, or either she's not probing. There's a problem that she's not discovering any perio. But the other thing I know is this. In some practices, Michelle, I'll see a situation where they only have maybe, 3 to 5 new patients per month. Well, if you don't have many new patients coming in, then you don't have a lot of new perio stuff. You might have a situation where the practice has plateaued and everybody there that's coming back in for maintenance, well, they're well maintained. Or maybe their perio's under control and they don't find a lot of new perio because it's just not there. So again, that can skew that.
This brings up an argument that I had with my periodontist years ago. Now, currently I'm actually in community health when I am volunteering as a hygienist. Otherwise, I'm kind of outside of the day-to-day private practice. But, years ago, working in the perio office, I felt sometimes that we were overdiagnosing those site-specific because maybe it was a 3 and now it's a 4, 4.5. And it's because they didn't, either in-laws came in town, Christmas happened, they didn't use their interdental brushes. And I'm like, let's give it a minute. Like, get back on the train. I think you could turn this around with just some really good home care, some good tissue stimulation. And so I wouldn't scale that area. And she was like, nope, you got to scale it. And I'm like, but it's like it's biofilm management in the home. Like, I just don't feel good about that. Do you think maybe people lean more what I was struggling with, or that they just truly are not like got that perio radar on?
It's both. It's both. And I was a hygienist, a clinical hygienist in a GP office for many years. I worked in a blue collar area. And I know there were times where I leaned toward being too conservative. There were times I could have treated certain things as more aggressively, and I didn't. But at the same time, there has to be a truth mark. There has to be bone loss in order to do root plane and scaling. So if my doctor finds or if I find a 4 millimeter pocket and there's no bone loss there, don't ask me to root plane that, because that's not bone loss. That's just swollen tissue. Hygienists struggle with these kinds of things too. But the other thing is, Michelle, the other problem is that too many hygienists today work in offices that are really run and gun. And they are on very tight schedules. There are a lot of PPO practices where they're doing discounted dentistry. They're not giving these patients much time in the chair. And the hygienist is simply not finding the perio because she's having to move these people through so quickly.
They're surviving. They're just surviving there.
Yes. Yes, and
every day.
I feel for hygienists like that. I really do. And when I get these numbers and I see that so-and-so doesn't have hardly any perio codes in her 3-month analysis, I'm not going to judge this hygienist until I see the situation, because I know very well what it's like to work in a really high stress, high volume office. I worked in an office like that. And if they're not giving me time to probe, then guess what? I'm not going to do it, or I'm just going to spot probe here and there, and I just trying to keep pedaling the bike fast as I can to stay on time. I know that reality. So I'm not going to judge and then if I find that it's one of those meal offices, then I'm going to say, the doctor, the problem here is your problem. The problem here is that you all have created a barrier to this hygienist being able to do these chartings and find this perio, because you're running people through here so fast. She can't do this. And so you've got to break this barrier by either having an assistant available for her to do these chartings, which she can do it in 5 minutes or less if she's got an assistant to take it down and put it in the computer, or if she's got a voice activated something to get rid of that barrier so she can get it done.
Right. Yeah. I actually have VoiceWorks, that voice one. And that has been the keeper of my sanity, because
So you like it.
I love it. And it's such a great feedback tool for my patients as well, because at least that's what I'm experiencing, because I can set it to be like warning, or it gives you like that siren alert if I'm like 6 millimeters and bleeding, and they hear the thing. So it's not a secret what I'm finding. And I do enjoy that.
You're lucky. I'm glad you have it. And I wish more offices did.
Me too. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So then downtime.
Well, downtime can be tallied. We can come up with a number that tells me what is the percentage of downtime. When a doctor says, well, I'm having too many broken appointments in my practice, well, I might say, well, what is your downtime percentage? Nobody ever knows what their downtime percentage is, but there's a way to figure it. So I tell offices to take 3 months, take 3 months. And first you tally up all the time units that the hygienist could actually see patients. So like if you're on a 10-minute increment schedule, 1 hour would have 6 time units in it. They're 10 minutes increments, okay?
Right.
So in an 8 to 5 day, if you're on a 10-minute increment schedule, you're going to have 48 time units, okay? If you're on a 15-minute increment schedule, then you're going to have 32 time units per day. So I want to know the total time units available to see patients in a month, and then a second month, and a third month. I like a 3-month average. I think it's truer. All right, so don't count lunchtime. Don't count time marked off or blocked for staff meetings and those kinds of things. Don't count that, just the available time. Then the next thing I want to know is how many of those time units were not filled. How many did not have a patient in them? Then we're going to divide the big number into the little number, and we're going to move the decimal 2 places. And that'll tell us the true downtime percentage. So if I did an analysis, I'll share with you 3 hygienists, that Lisa, Elena, and Simone. So Lisa had 302 available units in the first month. She had 65 open units, so her downtime percentage was 22%. So Elena had 256 time units. She had 51 that were open. So that made her downtime percentage be 20%. And Simone had 352 available units. She had 68 open units. So that made her downtime be 19%. So I can average for the hygiene department with this data their total average downtime percentage is 20%. Well, that's way too high. I mean, that is high. I like the downtime to be anywhere from 5 to 8%. So that gives us something to work towards. So I can say to front desk, okay, so here we got this big problem here. We've identified a 20% downtime average. So what we want to try is to get that down by 5 percentage points. So, okay, for the next 3 months, let's see if we can work on this and get our downtime down to 15% as an average for the 3 hygienists. And that gives us something to work toward. And there's going to be a reward if we get this 15%. You know, if we can get there, they're going to get a reward. And I'm going to work that out with a doctor, what they're going to get. But it's probably going to be a gift certificate to a shopping center or something, you know, something like that. But downtime's a huge destroyer of profitability. So it's important.
And I think the area of contention amongst professionals right now, I'd say in the last 3 years, I've seen more hygienists saying, you know, the labor law issue, clocking out when there's downtime.
Oh, I hate that stuff. I think it's illegal.
And that's where we've had some people on with labor laws, and it's definitely depending on your states and everything. But it doesn't make sense to me why that would happen, because I'm assuming it's because either the office manager or the dentist is being very short-sighted. Again, maybe a little stressed out, not being allowed for creative thinking of like, okay, let's run these numbers. Let's have a conversation. Let's look at our recall. Let's, well, you're the infection control manager. Let's do that. Let's, you know, do something that's actually productive and good for the office versus having you clock out. That seems very counterproductive to me. Do you have any advice for that?
It is very disrespectful of a dental hygienist to ask her to clock out when she does not have a patient in her chair. And are they asking the dental assistant to clock out if the doctor doesn't have a patient, or are they asking the front desk person to clock out? It's totally disrespectful of the dental hygienist. Doctors get to the point sometimes where they would rather step over dollars to pick up dimes. You know, that old saying. But the legality of it is this thing about engaged to wait or waiting to be engaged. It's a legal concept, and I think that what they've come up with now, the latest I've heard, is that like if tomorrow on your schedule 3 people cancel, they can legally tell you not to come in until 11 o'clock. You know, or they can do that. But if you're already at work and your patient just doesn't show up, for them to ask you to clock out, you are waiting to be engaged. And that is illegal for them to ask you to clock out. So I don't think this has been tested in the courts, Michelle. I don't know for sure. I haven't heard of a case yet, but it is sure to be tested in the courts if it hasn't already been. And I'll be glad when they finally test it in the courts and they finally, so we'll know there won't be any ambiguity there. Scheduling is a front desk function, and you've got to hold front desk people accountable for that body of work. It is not a hygienist function. Hygienists function at the chair. So I think it's a poor use of hygienist time, having them up there on the phone, trying to get patients in and activating schedules and stuff. I hate that kind of stuff. Doctors need to.
That's so, I'm glad you're saying that. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. No, I was just saying, I think it's great that you're bringing that up, because there's been some times where they've come back to me and be like, well, your schedules fell apart tomorrow. And I'm like, well, I'm actively seeing 9 patients today. So I don't know how you want me to fill that. Like, yeah, what do you want me to do about this? And then, and the fact that the hygienists are getting, that weight is on their shoulders now versus the people who are up there with the phone, the recall system or the recall schedule, the information to actually fill the schedule. I can't do anything about that when I'm trying to produce back here.
Exactly. It's a matter of job descriptions and holding somebody accountable for certain bodies of work. and working smart, not just holding it against dental hygienists because they're the highest paid staff members. Hygienists are producers. They're supposed to be well paid. So doctors that kind of get off on that tangent, they usually have a hard time keeping staff anyway.
True. And I do like that you're not saying that it's 0% downtime, because man, I tell you, when I do see that opening on a schedule, sometimes I'm like, oh, praise Jesus. Lord, I can go catch up. I can sharpen some instruments. I can go to the bathroom. I can write up my charts. I'm like, oh, thank you, Lord.
There's always things that need to be done. And I know that. I don't think I think zero downtime is pretty much a mirage out there. It's not a reality.
Well, and I'm sorry if I'm digressing too much on this, but my thought too is when you're thinking of these time slots, right? And then also bringing in the idea of 33%, what about the non-producing times of morning huddles and writing up your charts and sending out letters and stocking things? Like, how does that factor into the business part of dentistry? Is that just something that like we need, suck it up, buttercup, you don't get paid for those things? Or are those lesser dollar amounts when you're doing those? Like, how does that work? And what are your suggestions for that?
Well, I think doctors who split hairs and want to pay a lesser amount for that body of work that should be done, I think they're hurting themselves, because I think they really need to, and I've said this to some clients that actually had that mindset about, okay, yeah, I know I have to pay my hygienist to be at a staff meeting. If it's required, they have to be paid. But I said, how would you like to be that hygienist? And you typically make $30, $35 an hour, and you're told you've got to go do something. You've got to be at this meeting, but you're only going to get $10 an hour for that. You think you're going to come into that meeting with a great attitude? I said, let's just be realistic about this. I said, why don't you respect all of your staff members? And if this meeting is so important that you believe it should be happening, then compensate these people like you think it's worth something. Don't compensate these people at this minimum wage amount, which is the law. They have to pay them at least a minimum wage. I don't agree with that. I don't buy it for a minute. And if they want their staff members to be participating in, often the best staff meetings is when everybody is really engaged in this staff meeting. Well, I wouldn't be engaged if I thought I got to sit here now and go through this whole hour and I'm only going to get $10 an hour for this. This is a big waste of my time. That's what I would feel like.
Right. The other question I have is when we talk about that 3 times, you need to make 3 times production wise for your salary. What is in that production? Are we talking x-rays? Are we talking fluoride? Like, what codes can we as hygienists include in our production? Because you often see that, like, who gets the exam, who gets the x-rays? How does that work?
Well, this is a matter of opinion, but I feel like everything that happens in that operatory should be toward hygienist production except the doctor exam. The doctor exam, that's kind of a legal thing. Hygienists can't charge for exam. Like if you're in a state where you can work if your doctor's not in the office, physically in the office, then you can't charge out an exam legally because the doctor did not sit down and put his or her hands in this patient's mouth and look. That's a legal thing. So I don't like to allocate exams into hygiene production. Now, some offices do. Hey, they do. That's their business. But I think it's better to separate that out, the doctor exam. Hygienists often do most of the work for those exams, like period chartings and those kinds of things. But all the same, everything else should count. Now, when it comes to products like toothbrushes and water picks and things like that, there's a cost to the doctor for those products. And I think that raw cost should come out. But if they charge over and above, like if a Rotodent costs an office $80 and you charge $120 for it, then the hygienist ought to get $40 production for that, because the hygienist is going to be the one that teaches that patient how to use it anyway. So there should be some value attached to that production.
And how does that look if I'm doing assisted hygiene?
Assisted hygiene, I love it, and I've written a lot about assisted hygiene. Give me an assistant and turn me loose and see how productive I can be. I can see 12 or 13 patients in an 8 to 5 day and be less tired at the end of the day than when I saw 8 by myself. And but no, in the assisted model, you look at the math a little differently. You look at the raw production, but you've got to take out the pay for the assistant and also the assistant's benefits and any costs associated with that employee. Although the hygienist is not paying it, it's coming off the office expenses. But boy, is it a much more productive model, and I love it.
Oh, that's good to know. Mm-hmm. And this is one thing I was just curious as you were talking. Tony Stefanu, who is a dentist up in New York, gives a lot of courses. I've worked with him for years. He has been a real big advocate of hygienists owning a percentage of the practice. And his point is you're a little bit more like, let's do it. Let's incorporate these ideas. Let's be producers, but also that you feel like you have a dog in the fight as well. And that if you are going to retire as a dentist, and I've been here for 25 years, busting my butt, and then someone else comes, you sell it, and all that I've created as far as the production side of, and the relationships and everything, you kind of lose it. And now you got to make that transition. And so he was like, if you own a percentage, then you feel a little more comfortable and a little less scared about those kind of transitions. And again, you have that dog in the fight and you're willing to produce if that's what is necessary. What do you think about that?
I've never considered owning a percentage, but in the state of Maine, hygienists can own a practice now, own the whole thing. And I did an article about 2 hygienists, a husband and wife hygienists, that bought a general practice. One of the hygienists worked there, and the doctor was trying to retire, and he couldn't sell it. And so the hygienist said, well, what if I buy this practice? And they worked it out. And so the hygienist bought it, and the hygienist employs a dentist it's his employee. And he's never worked a day without a dentist in his practice, but he owns it, he and his wife. Hey, go for it. I like that. I like that if he wanted to go out on that limb and buy that practice and assume all that debt and responsibility, then I think he should be allowed to do it. He's a smart guy.
I like it. So just to wrap it up, since I know that I don't want to take your whole day, but are there any other benchmarks that we maybe didn't cover? Any questions that you often get from the business side of it that you'd like to tell our listeners about?
Well, the only thing we didn't cover that I think we probably should at least mention is the salary to production ratio. That's an important number, and hygienists that are thinking about asking for a raise, and I get a lot of questions about that written to me, and I tell them, you've got to know the numbers. You've got to know where you stand right now with regard to your salary to production ratio. So the way it works is that, again, it's numbers. You find out your production for the past 3 months. And then you have your gross wages for the last 3 months, and you divide the little number into the big number. The big number into the little number. I get it right. Big number into the little number. And that will tell you your salary to production ratio. Now, I know you're probably thinking about, well, what if there's a lot of discount dentistry? What if the production number is not the true production number? What if the production there's a huge amount of write-off? Well, I look at it like this. Hygienists don't have any decision making in whether a doctor decides to participate with a PPO or not. So but I also know that doctors can't pay out what doesn't come in. So in that regard, I like to split the difference. I like to split the difference in the write-off dentistry. Take half of that amount and count that toward production. All right, so then let's say a hygienist finds out, well, let's say she just works in a fee-for-service practice, and she finds out that her salary to production ratio is 47%. Well, if I remember an office I consulted in, this hygienist sat down in front of me and she just got red-faced. She was so angry. She said, I want you to know that I have not had a raise in this practice for the past 3 years. And I said, really? And she said, yes, and I deserve a raise. It's time for me to have a raise. And I said, well, do you know what your salary to production ratio is? And she said to me, that is not my job. That is not part of what I do. I said, oh, but I disagree. It's a big part of your job because it's the reason that you're not going to get a raise. I said, let me show you the numbers, because I had her salary to production. She's 55%. She's 22% more than what the industry benchmark says. I said, so she said, and she was very disheartened when I showed her that. And I said, look, I understand the dilemma here. I said, we're going to work on this. First of all, we're going to get your doctor to raise your fees. I said, because I think hygiene's too low. See, it made her salary look way high if the fees are low. So I said, that's the first thing we're going to do. But I said, the second thing we're going to do is we have to figure out ways to get your production up. I said, we need to sit down and really look at what you're doing and figure out some ways to get your production up. And there are some ways to get the production up. I'll tell you an easy one, Michelle. Some hygienists think they've got to have, in GP offices, they think they've got to have an hour with every patient. Look, you don't need an hour with every patient. There's a lot of wasted time there. Some patients, you do need an hour, but hygienists need to think proactively. What am I going to do next visit? How much time do I need for that? So if I did bite wings and a perio charting today, I'm not going to do bite wings and perio charting next time. So why, if I need an hour with this patient to do all this, why would I give myself an hour if I'm not going to do that next time? You see? So I tell them, really start being very critical about how much time you give for all these different procedures. Start offering things like power brushes and water picks and things like that. You can make money off of these things. They help your patients, and you got to teach them how to use them. I mean, there are lots of things. You can improve your scheduling. You can look at adjuncts. You can get your production up there, raise the fees so the production's up there like it ought to be. But I said, honey, you can't have a raise. I said, your salary to production ratio is already 55%. You can't have a raise when it's this high. So, but if I find out, but now look at this one, her salary to production ratio is 27%. Then I would probably say the doctor, she needs a raise. At least get her up to 30%, at least do that. So it's an important number, and many hygienists do not know what their salary to production ratio is.
I was definitely one of them, 100%. And, I want to circle back to that, maybe not scheduling as much time on the next one, because the pushback that I had gotten when I mentioned this in my past private practices, now I can get whatever I want at my community health. They're just like, we're just happy that you're here and that these patients are being
I'm
seen.
sure.
It's such a blessing for me. But before, it had more to do with, okay, well, Michelle, you're saying I did get an hour for every patient, which was glorious for me. But I was also seeing perio, and everyone was a little bit more intense sometimes. But if I needed 45 minutes for the next one, or somebody was just there for their one time a year implant maintenance, tissue graft, whatever, I didn't need an hour. But they were like, no, we're not going to give you 45 minutes because that jacks up our schedule. And then how do we fill that 45 minutes when that person cancels and finds somebody that also needs 45 minutes? Am I making sense of like how
Yes.
so how would you correct that or help implement that into a practice? Like if I was dictating the time a little bit, how does that, because I know the front office and the office managers are going to lose their mind sometimes on those.
Well, a good scheduling coordinator knows that a schedule is often like a puzzle. You want to make the pieces fit and you want everything to be nice and tight. And a good scheduling coordinator does not mind calling Mrs. Jones and saying, hey, would you be able to come in at 2:30 instead of 3 and move people around a little bit, not an inordinate amount, but a little bit to tighten things up, to make room for another 1-hour visit and that type thing. It's like the people are so hung up on 1 hour because it just looks so neat in the schedule, and it does, but it's not reality. It's just not reality. So I tell hygienists all the time, I said, when I'm lecturing, I said, if you're one of those hygienists that still gets 1 hour per patient, you are an anomaly today. I said, most hygienists don't get an hour with every patient.
That's true. And the one last thing that I did want to touch on, my specialty in the last 5 years has been home care products, the evidence-based side of applying certain products to very specific patients. And the one thing that, and you just mentioned that if you want to raise that production, adjuncts and products are a really easy way to do that. And I have a study from 2018 that looked back at 2012 data that said almost $5 billion went to over-the-counter oral care products. $5 billion. And like just thinking about you placing more emphasis on the products that you're recommending, that OHI code, use that OHI code and actually give the patients the products that they need and sell it to them, because then they have a dog in the fight. They have a more value on that sample and that goodie bag or whatever. And they're getting something that they need versus giving Rite Aid and Walgreens your money. I think that just makes sense to me.
It absolutely, you're right on. You are right on. I agree with you 100%. I think we need to have in our offices the things that we want our patients to use, and we need to teach them how to use those things.
Absolutely. So any last tidbits? We always ask to our guests to give any advice or any little tidbits to students or new graduates, because we have quite a few, and we actually have quite a few people listening that have yet to go to hygiene school. Like they're thinking about that career change. So anything that you would like to give as advice today would be great for them.
Well, if I'm thinking about students, I love students. I used to teach in a dental hygiene school, and I would say, please understand when you go into an office that you bring an intangible value to that practice, not just what you can do with your hands, but make yourself valuable in this office by being excited about your work, by really putting that patient first, by promoting the doctor's dentistry. When I used to temp, Michelle, I would look for reasons to brag on that doctor's dentistry to that patient. Wow, these are beautiful crowns you have in your mouth. And things like that brings intangible value to that staff member, to that practice. If you will do those kinds of things when you go to work and you get in an office, and try to keep the personal stuff, the personality stuff and the politics in the background. Just do your job and do it well and be there and be engaged and be interested. Be interested in your numbers too. Be interested. Don't just say, oh, that's not part of my job. Be willing to jump in there and do anything it needs to be done. Just do it. You're there to just make yourself so valuable to this doctor that he can't imagine his world without you in it.
Well, your information today, I learned a lot personally. I definitely was able to reflect on some things that maybe I could have done better in previous situations. And if anyone wants to reach out to you, maybe send some questions in to you, get your book, take a course, where can they find you?
My website is wattersonspeaks.com, and Watterson has two T's, Watterson, wattersonspeaks.com, and you'll find I have a sharpening DVD. I teach hygienists how to sharpen using a handpiece and a little friction grip stone. Oh my gosh, if you ever learn how to sharpen using a handpiece, you will never go back to a manual stone again. And I have 3 books. 2 of them are out of print, but I do sell them in the ebook format. They're not out of date. They're just, I didn't order any reprints. I just sell them as an ebook now. And I do have the hard copy Real World Dental Hygiene. Still have copies of that. So.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time and sharing your expertise with our listeners today. I know they are going to really enjoy this month. I'm hoping that they listen with real open ears because, as you said, I was at Hygienist. I don't need to know these numbers. Nope.
Yeah.
Let me just get in there and treat the patient. I don't care about the outside stuff. And I definitely see that was not the right way to approach my career. So thank you for your time today. And I hope people do reach out to you and order your book and take your courses.
All right. Well, thank you so much for this opportunity, Michelle. I've enjoyed speaking today.
I have no doubt there were some amazing pearls in this episode for you guys. I keep listening to these, even though I'm present for them. This is the fun thing about podcasting is, well, there's some fun and there's some annoyances with it, I will say. You guys have probably been like screaming questions to your, iPod or your phone or your car radio, like ask them this. And in the moment, it's like you're just trying to process the information. You're making sure equipment's working. There's noises in the background, making sure the conversation flows. And so some of those things don't pop in your head. So when I listen to it again, there's 2 things that happen to me. 1, I'm like, why didn't you answer that or ask that question? 3 things I should say. 2, Michelle, stop rambling. And 3, oh my gosh, like I don't even remember them saying that. What a good point. And now I'm going to like make a note and remember it. And the business episodes this month have been ones that I've listened to a few times because there was just so many great pearls that I wanted to make sure I took them all away. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. Next month is going to be really fun. We're doing a oral systemic episode or series. Let us know how you like these series. If it really makes sense to kind of build on it and have like a topic specific to the month, or if you like the one-offs like that we used to do where we were just like had a modge podge of people and, one episode was different than the next week. So let us know. We're here for you guys. And follow us on Instagram. We have some really good things happening on Instagram. We're starting to do more Instagram lives with some fun people, maybe do some after the show follow-ups with our guest. If you have questions that you want us to ask them, we're doing something called Chairside Chat. This is sponsored by Tepe USA, who has the best products. I know I've loved them. I've worked with them for years. I've been a user. I'm going on 12 years, guys. Like I can't even understand that. So now I'm doing Chairside Chats where I can break down a product for you. We're also doing Science Sunday where we are breaking down clinical evidence-based research for the clinician. And you guys have been commenting on that. So please interact, engage, because what we give you isn't going to be perfect. So we want to have a discussion about this because science is not black and white always. And what else do we have? Check out the podcast network. There are 10 amazing short episodes, 2 a day. Check that out. Dental Podcasting Channel 1 and Channel 2. And then go head over to our website, a tale of two hygienist.com. You can email me, Michelle at a tale of two hygienist.com, or even Andrew at a tale of two hygienist.com. But we love you guys. Thank you again for listening. You're the best. And please share this and go rate us on iTunes. We would appreciate that so, so much. Have a great week. Bye, y'all.